the political viewpoints that are being projected by these channels. They're diverse in its sense. It's either right-wing or extremely right-wing. Nobody envisaged, when local TV was introduced, that a partial propaganda-based news channel owned by Rupert Murdoch would be occupying that spot. And what you're presiding over is a change that's more than just a little bit of variety of opinion, but actually a media that's going down into a rabbit hole where this is not about news, it's about ratings, and ratings you can get by playing into the darker corners of the internet. You said earlier on in your evidence it's good that we're seeing more diverse media on radio and TV. Recent GB News appointments have included Jacob Rees-Mogg, Esther McVeigh, Philip Davis, and earlier this month, Leah Anderson. TalkTV have landed Nadine Dorries for their organisation. Do you detect any kind of a pattern in their hiring strategies?
Well, look, it's for them who they choose to put on their programmes to...
Would you describe that as diverse, new and diverse TV?
Well, there are two new channels there, in TalkTV and GB News, new over the last couple of years.
Do they offer a diverse viewpoint to the public?
A whole range of other broadcasters that we're more familiar with. So, it's not for Ofcom to determine who's presenting programmes as long as they're meeting the rules.
But how can you describe it as diverse if really the political viewpoints that are being projected by these channels are basically... They're diverse in its sense. It's either right-wing or extremely right-wing, I suppose. And you could say that, couldn't you?
Well, look, our job is to assess any complaints, and we do also sometimes do proactive monitoring of this, to make sure that individual programmes meet our rules. So that's about due impartiality. It's about a balance of views within any individual programme. So even a programme presented by somebody with a very strong set of political views needs to make sure that other voices are heard, or they will come up against our
They're
guidelines.
really taking the mick out of your impartiality guidelines, aren't they, really? I'm interested to hear that you've done proactive monitoring because that is interesting. There have been, I think, over 3,500 complaints about GB News's coverage to you. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
How many have been
right.
upheld?
We have upheld one complaint last week, which we published quite a full response on. So that's the only one that we found against so far. But would you
describe that as a normal ratio? Carefully. You had 3,500 complaints and you'd uphold one. Is that what you'd expect to be the normal ratio of upholding complaints?
Well, it depends on the viewing audience. So, for example, a lot of our complaints, particularly during the pandemic, were about individual programmes where tens of thousands of viewers wrote in to complain. That's often ITV programmes that have very big audiences, but there you might get a very large number of individuals complaining about a single programme.
Right. So if these 3,500
complaints... channel like GB
complaints...
News has much lower audiences.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That
is a fair point. So
ratio.
These 3,500 complaints, how many programmes were they about?
I'm not sure. I'd need to confirm that.
Could you let the committee know?
Yes,
because I think that's relevant to
that
understanding what the ratio of complaints being upheld is. Do you think that TalkTV and GB News could be classed as public service broadcasters?
No, they're not providing a public service remit, and I don't think they would describe themselves as such.
If that is the case, why has TalkTV been allowed to obtain prominence on the electronic programming guide that is normally reserved for public service broadcasters? I had to fight very, very hard for quite a long time to get prominence for S4C on some services when it was buried away down in the electronic programming guide as clearly a public service broadcaster with an important remit, particularly in Wales, but it's a UK-wide channel. So why has that been allowed to happen when normally they should be at 237 on Freeview electronic programming guide? They're now on channels 7 and 8 in lots of parts of the country.
Well, that's the local TV slot in the EPG guide.
So why have they got that slot, the local TV? So why were they given that slot?
I can explain that. So the licence is still with local TV, and as part of that licence, because they are high up the programme guide, they are required to deliver a certain number of hours of local programming, typically around 35 hours a week. It varies a little bit with different licences. But outside that, they're free to broadcast what they like. They retain overall editorial responsibility for that as the licensee. So in the case of Local TV Limited, they previously had a deal with CBS. They were broadcasting largely American programming. And they have shifted that so that they now have a deal with TalkTV.
You happy with that?
Well, we sought assurances that they still had overall scheduling and editorial control, because
were
that's
you
what
consulted
they're
before it
required
happened?
to do.
Because it just suddenly appeared on my TV out of the blue.
We were certainly made aware of it and sought assurances about what they need to do within their licence, which is to continue to produce the right amount of local TV, which is what they're doing, but also that they maintain overall editorial control and scheduling control.
The truth here, isn't it, is that this is a service that has utterly failed local TV as an experiment. I think it was Jeremy Hunt's idea originally, and it's utterly failed as an experiment. And in desperate throes to make a bit of cash, they've flogged off to TalkTV, who are desperate to gazump GB News by being further up the electronic programming guide, and have therefore managed to insinuate their way into an area of the electronic programming guide that is supposed to have a public service broadcasting purpose. That is a reasonable summary of the facts, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure I quite agree with all of that.
Well, which bits don't you agree with?
Well, what I would say is that, as part of their licence, local TV is required to produce local television. And outside those hours,
you said that already, but which bit of what I said don't you agree with?
That's where they've got a contract with TalkTV. So it isn't a conflict with their licence, provided that, as I said, we've had the assurances, which we have, about how they're meeting that.
Nobody envisaged when local TV was introduced that hours and hours of broadcasting high up an electronic programming guide. They thought they might have a few reruns and some old films and stuff like that, perhaps in those hours that weren't being broadcasted. Nobody envisaged that a partial and clearly, propaganda-based news channel owned by Rupert Murdoch would be occupying that spot, did they?
Well, certainly, I don't think anyone would have envisaged this, because the channel wasn't there at the time, TalkTV. And
how long do we have?
That commercially, it is a very difficult business model, local TV, and that's why they've sought deals for their programming outside the licensed hours of local television.
How much longer is it before this local TV experiment runs into the buffers?
Well, I mean, I can't say. That's a commercial decision for those.
Isn't there a deadline when this has to be renewed at some point? Or?
I'm not sure when those licences come up. Very happy to come back.
Could you let us know, because
yes.
I'd be very interested to know that, given what's happened here. You have, as you said, upheld one complaint against GB News, and I think the presenter concerned has now resigned from GB News, possibly before that complaint was upheld. He's quoted as having said he used to call the GB News compliance officer Ofcom's bitch, and said in a video he put out himself, this presenter, former GB News presenter now, well, Ofcom's bitch has had his revenge now. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's Ofcom's job to assess complaints and to deal with those, and in this instance we dealt with this particular programme, reported on that quite fully last week. I don't have anything to say about any wider comments that have been made. Have
you noticed any evolution of the kind of broadcasting that GB News have been doing since their inception as a rival news channel initially?
Well, they've clearly introduced a number of changes to their schedule. What they started off with was a very specific set of programmes, and they've adapted and changed along the way. I'd expect that. What we've been doing is assessing any complaints and any concerns and dealing with them under the broadcasting code, weighing questions like due impartiality, the potential to mislead the audience in a material way, against the need also to uphold freedom of expression. We do need to remember that is a statutory duty on us, and is a very important part of this.
I put it to you that what's actually going on here is that in order to gain some ratings, they've had to play into an audience they may not have initially intended to appeal to, but which is the audience they've ended up with in this age of internet conspiracies and so on. And that when they look at the little ticker in the back office about their ratings, they notice that every time they run up the flagpole, perhaps not saying this is absolutely true, but they run up the flagpole a conspiracy theory from the darker corners of the internet, that bit of the audience that is into all these conspiracy theories on the internet is tickled, and they're the people who are following. There's a big difference between the daytime and the nighttime sort of coverage, isn't there? You know, on GB News, they do actually do some straight news in daytime, but in evening time, it's usually, you know, it could be a story saying, why is Bill Gates buying up a load of land in America? And to us that sounds like an innocuous question. But to somebody familiar with the deeper and more insane conspiracy theories on the internet, that ticks their box, that tickles their fancy, and that gets that ticker going up on GB News. And what you're presiding over, I think complacently from your answers, is a change that's more than just having a little bit of variety, which we're not getting anyway, but a little bit of variety of opinion being put to us on media, but actually a media that's going down into a rabbit hole where this is not about news, it's about ratings, and ratings you can get by playing into the darker corners of the internet. Have you considered that possibility?
Well, look, I think you're right that there is a link between the way that broadcasters reach audiences through their programmes and then the way that that plays out on social media, either through the broadcaster's own accounts or by their presenters.
I'm putting to you that it comes around the other side. It starts
media.
because they know what the conspiracy theories are on social media, and that is what they are feeding off and getting their ratings from. And
well, I certainly agree with you that that's becoming an ever more complicated pattern, and that those links are definitely there. And that speaks really to what I was saying at the very beginning, talking to Mr. Green about the work we're doing on media plurality now, which is about who's controlling and how the algorithms are controlling in particular what you get on social media, and whether or not it encourages people actively to go into rabbit holes where they can't see through to the truth anymore, and where they get ever more polarised in their views.
Understood,
so I think that is a very
you did tell the
question.
Chair about that. It's an important question. I'm encouraging you in that work to consider the link between that and these new, more broadcasting so-called news channels, which, if you're saying most of their output isn't news in your answers to Mr. Nicholson, and that's why they're entitled to put sitting MPs on the programme. So if it's not a news channel, I think it is something that in that work that you're doing about social media, that link with some of these new types of outlets, and there's plenty of evidence of it from North America, as we know, is something that you should examine as part of that investigation. Will you do that?
I think that's a good point. So, look, our media plurality work is, we're very actively engaging on that. Very happy to make sure that the links to that and the work we've already published is available to the committee. But it may be something that you're interested in.
Obviously, I am interested in it, but I don't think you quite answered. Is that something you'll do as part of this work? If you need time to consider it,
take that away and reflect on it.
And could you write back to us and let us know what you've concluded?
The links between broadcast programmes and social media is a very good one, and we're something that I'm very happy to reflect on. Yes.
Thank you.